Hello and welcome to the Valiant Growth Podcast. Today I'm talking to Rande Moss. She's an eating psychology and mind-body wellness coach, and we will be talking about the subject of being mindful around eating. Welcome to the show, Rande.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I know that you have a really interesting and spooky story with your own diets. Could you tell me more about that?
Oh, is it spooky? It was quite intense. Yeah, I had a long history of dieting. Pretty much from my early teen years on, I did every extreme thing that you could possibly think of. Definitely went down the disordered eating route of binging and purging, starving myself, juice cleanses in my teen years, slim fast, calorie counting. In my 20s, I really took it up a notch. I was always reaching for the most extreme thing I could find, anything from eating one meal a day to juice fasting. I did long juice fasts from 10 days up to 3 months at a time. And it never got me where I wanted to go, which was, liking myself and being happy and content in my body. Um, no matter what I did, I just couldn't seem to get there.
And so this, if I understood correctly, these are we're talking about months where
Oh, yes,
you haven't had any solid food during them. Is that correct? Is
that
that
is correct.
that is fascinating?
Uh, Yeah, it was quite an experience. And I mean, I took it on as a sort of, telling myself and presenting it as this sort of spiritual quest. And in a way, it was. I wanted to get in touch with myself or get in touch with something deeper, but there was the part of me still that, expected to be really skinny at the end. And that was a huge prize for me. And the fact that I still didn't like my body at the end was really devastating.
Yeah, I can imagine that after all the effort. Though I have to commend you. I mean, I'm a guy who likes going to the extremes, and I think a lot of
Right.
a lot of the listeners are too. So you went there, you tried it. So what changed? What changed your perspective?
I think it was in part the fact that I sort of exhausted all of the extremes. I mean, in the midst of all of that, I did super um, high carb fruitarian diets that were really low fat or super low carb diets that were ketogenic. I just did every end of everything. And if that wasn't it, I sort of realized like that my body being any certain way or my diet being any certain way just wasn't going to be it. Like it wasn't going to be the fix that I was looking for. And so at some point, I just decided, like, screw it. I have been dieting my whole life. I have been reaching for perfection my whole life. What if I just quit making rules about food and just see what happened? And as a result of that, like, all of the real growth came after that. I finally just accepted my body the way that it was. I started listening to my body instead of imposing these really intense rules on it. And then just like everything cracked open. Everything cracked open from a place of self-acceptance, which I never would have believed because I thought, you have to strive really hard to to grow and to be happy, and life is hard and life is challenging. And that simple like relaxing into who I was what moved me forward.
Was there a specific moment that you can remember, or a specific influence, or a book, or was it more of a process that you made this switch?
Um, I mean, I remember there was an instance, but I think that it was only a sort of magical instance because I had done so many years of reading over the years. I had definitely read every book you can imagine on emotional eating and binge eating, because I was a heavy binge eater all of these years too, when I wasn't on one of the really strict plans. And so I had a really good base, and I just felt like I had gotten rid of so much of my binge eating. The emotional eating was maybe only sort of an issue, but I still was clinging to this need to be skinny, to be perfect, to find that perfect diet. And I signed up for my eating psychology training, and I was about halfway through, and it was all kind of starting to click, like, this has been crazy, this whole thing. Like, what am I doing? And between that and a few bloggers online who did the same thing, who just sort of gave up the rules, were eating intuitively. I was just like, this is it. Like, I've exhausted my options. Let's do this. And that was maybe a year ago that that finally happened.
Tell me more about eating intuitively and your no diet.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I never really intended to take on the label intuitive eater because there is a book called Intuitive Eating, which is wonderful. It's really good, and I pretty well line up with all of the principles, though I'm not trained with them, and I don't necessarily call myself an intuitive eater anymore. Um, but the whole thing in the beginning was just to sort of erase all of the ideas in my mind about what was good for me and what was bad for me, and just eat what I was drawn to and see what happened. And that was the only place from which I was actually able to listen to what worked and what didn't, because I wasn't thinking, I'm going to eat this and I'm going to gain weight. I'm going to eat this and I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to eat this and I'm going to get cancer. I'm going to eat this and like whatever. I just sort of took on the assumption, I chose to take on the assumption that everything is good for me. And from that place, I just relaxed and ate. And of course, that wasn't true. Like, not everything did work for me. And some things created certain symptoms, and other things didn't leave me feeling so good. And so it's just been an experiment. And it's been light and easy and a lot more fun from that place of self-acceptance rather than trying to get somewhere constantly.
Just out of curiosity, when you got into this, where were like actually I could go a little bit back. So you did all of these diets. Were you overweight when you started or
Um, I, over all of those years, I lost about 30 pounds, with all of my really extreme things that I did. And it would go up and it would go down and all of that. And I was just terrified, thinking that if I ate whatever I wanted, my weight would go right back up. Like, I'm the one that has to be super tightly controlled. My body's this, and this, and it's so much harder than everybody else's. And it wasn't actually true. When I started eating a lot more mindfully, and I wasn't swinging back and forth, trying not to eat and then eating everything, I put on a little weight at first, and then as I started really listening and eating what actually worked for me, I lost it again, and I'm still at that low weight that I was maintaining before with all of the really strict dieting.
right? And the reason I ask this is because I'm sure we'll have a picture of you
Hmm.
on the video for those of you looking at the video, and what you look great. I will
Oh,
say
thank you.
that that's clear. And someone might look at that. Let's say someone who is obese,
Hmm.
and they might say, well, it's easy for her, right? It's easy for her
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, I trust my body because she already looks great and she didn't have a huge range there. So what would your answer be to that?
It's really interesting because I work with people and I coach one-on-one with people, and everybody says the same sort of things, that somebody else has it easier. And the people that hate their bodies, no matter if they're 100 pounds or 250 pounds, they all have the same sort of self-loathing feelings. And I know people at 100 pounds, little women, tiny, skinny women who hate their bodies and pick out every flaw. And I know women who are much, much heavier who really love their bodies and enjoy their curves and the way that their body moves and their sensuality and the sensations of being in their body. And so I think it's true. I've never been overweight by any normal standard. I was overweight by my own standards, I suppose, but I was always a normal weight, even when I was carrying the extra, more 30 more pounds than I had now. Um, and I do think, yes, that it's easier in this world to be a smaller person because we are not judged by the culture. But just in our own experiences, smaller people are no less harsh and judgmental and cruel and torturous of themselves than people in larger bodies. And larger people in larger bodies are no less capable of loving and enjoying their bodies than anybody else. And that I have seen with my own eyes and experienced.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I think as with anything else, I mean you can power through all sorts of diets and get to some kind of a body that would be looked upon as perfect. But if you don't do kind of the deeper work, the more psychological work, the underlying issue is not really like how much you weigh on the scale. So yeah, I
Right.
totally believe you on that one.
Right, and it's amazing because I've also known people at a higher weight who hated their bodies and worked and worked and worked and lost all this weight and still hated their bodies. Like you, even if you want to lose weight, like that's fine. Even if you want to adopt a certain style of eating, that's wonderful. That's fine. That's maybe where I disagree a little bit with the pure intuitive eating principles, is I think that there's room for play and experimentation as long as you're listening to your body and you're not restricting intensely and messing with your metabolism. But you have to start from a place of acceptance. You have to know that you'll be fine at the weight that you're starting out as. Otherwise, you're just going to lose this weight and be in constant fear of going back to that horrible place where you hated yourself. And that's no way to live either.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of funny because uh, I will contradict myself and you right now. I made a podcast a few podcasts ago, and you couldn't have seen it because it's not out yet. But in that podcast, I talk about my own experience, and I've lost some weight, and I've done it through calorie counting, just
Mm-hmm.
powering through. And in that, I say that what you can do is get to a place where you feel more comfortable, kind of with the powering through method, with the willpower method. And maybe then from that, if you're already there, it will be so let's say if you're in a healthy BMI classification and you're a little bit more satisfied, it will be easier to then go into self-acceptance and the roots of what causes this in you, just because you already have a history of success around your weight. Whereas if you don't and you're at the beginning, you might be afraid to experiment with something that might lead to even more weight gain, for example. Now, the reason why I contacted you is to get a deeper understanding. But I'm curious, what is your opinion on that perspective?
On so I'm taking in the big picture of what you said. It is indeed easier to accept yourself at a smaller weight, especially because that's culturally acceptable and you are sort of looking at, like, look, I accomplished this thing, I can accept myself now. But I just, I don't think that we should depend on that or depend on anything outside of ourselves in order to accept the core of who we are. Because if you had children, and one of them hadn't accomplished anything yet, you wouldn't love them any less. You know what I mean? You love them just for being your child, just because they're this human that came from you and you love them for no other reason. And I feel that that is the relationship we should have with our bodies, that we love it because it's our body, because it's home. And to do anything else is a sort of betrayal of this thing that we've been given. Um, and it's great to accomplish things and to feel like you like the way you look now more than you liked the way that you look then. That's all wonderful. Goals are wonderful. But to start with that core of self-acceptance moves you through without any fear, because then there's no fear of sliding back. There's just this, you get to move through it with a lot more ease. And also, that self acceptance sort of shifts you into a bit more of a relaxation response, which heightens your metabolism and also makes the whole process flow through a lot more easily. When you're coming from a place of judgment, there's always this sort of slight stress response. This I'm not quite good enough yet, or I'm doing things wrong, or I this once I get here I'll like myself. And the judgment puts you into a slight stress response, which actually lowers the metabolism. So you can power through. You can power through all of that. And you can accept yourself at the end, and that's really wonderful. But if something happens, say you were to get into a car accident and you were not able to work out, or maybe you didn't have access to the things that you like to eat and you put on the weight again, does that mean that you don't accept yourself anymore because you're back in that old place? Because you didn't to begin with when you were in that old place. So it's just much easier. It's much easier to start from that place. Not, it's harder to get there, but the whole process is easier if you start from that place.
Right. So,
And also,
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I also
no
want to
problem.
say that the sort of powering through or the like weight loss strategy or go from here to here, it tends to be a masculine strategy, and it works for men a lot more than it works for women. And obviously, the physiology is similar, and women are capable of powering through, but there's a much more feminine approach, which comes from embodiment and feeling and intuition, and that tends to be a lot more sustainable for most women.
Right. That's a very interesting perspective that I didn't think about. And yeah, I just want to clarify that I think we are absolutely on the same page when it comes to the value of self-acceptance and self-acceptance stemming from yes from a deeper course. So you're not self-accepting because of what the number is on the scale. So
Mhm.
yeah, I can accept that, but your self-acceptance really really be coming from healing.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I was thinking of my perspective is powering through as a crutch, but when you get there, you definitely have to do the work that gets you to self-acceptance. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, go.
Oh, I mean, you can do it at any point along the journey, certainly.
Right. But that your perspective would be to begin with the end in mind, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And perhaps it might work. Like one strategy might work for one person and the other for another person.
Definitely, which is why I don't necessarily take on the intuitive eating label as a coach anymore. I kind of was for a while, but everybody's journey is so different, and I like to hear their stories first and sort of understand how they like to work and how they understand themselves and how they understand the world. It's certainly not one size fits all.
Right. Though, dear listener, you should definitely trust Randy over me. She- she's she's got a lot more going. Okay, so let's talk about self-acceptance. How do you get there? How do you do that? What's the process there?
Well, in my work, it often starts with body image, and you can go a lot deeper from there, but that's what so many women are so fixated on. And we spend, so many of us will spend time looking at women who are the size that we want to be or have the body that we want to have, and we have this sort of fitspiration or thinspiration or these magazines or this sort of ideal of what we think that a woman is supposed to be. And I like to start with shifting that because studies have shown, and I'm not exactly sure what the percentages or where this came from, um, but there were some studies that were showing that like the bodies that we view the most often end up being what we sort of want for ourselves. So women that were in environments or taking in pictures of really luscious, beautiful, curvy women wanted that for themselves. They wanted to emulate that. Women who were constantly taking in pictures of very, very skinny, slender women wanted that for themselves. And that is a shiftable thing. It's hard because we've sort of grown up in a culture that's idealized this one body type, so you have to do it very consciously, and start saying goodbye to the magazines for a while and really looking into a lot of body positivity and women of all sizes because there is just such variety. And it's for me and for my clients, it's helped us feel a lot more like, oh my God, there's so much beauty in the world, and I am just one piece of that, like one piece of this whole spectrum of beauty rather than having an ideal of beauty and trying to reach it. We're already in that spectrum, and whether we want to make shifts from there, that's fine. But to have that sort of contentment, knowing that we're a piece of this whole beautiful picture of womanhood. So the body image piece is big. Shifting beliefs, uncovering whatever the negative beliefs are about oneself, whether it's I have to be thin to be beautiful, or I'm not smart, or I'm not creative, or I'm not adventurous, or whatever it is. All of these stories, sort of like plucking them out, and these come out over the weeks as I work with people, and reversing them and rewriting the story that we tell about ourselves. So that's definitely a piece of it. Separating our critical inner voice from our more authentic, truer self, so that we're seeing the lies that we tell ourselves or the way that we hold ourselves back is also a really big piece. So there are just a lot of ways. It really depends also on who I'm talking to, what sort of approach I would take and what I would do first.
Do you personally do you do journaling?
Hmm.
Do you do journaling?
Yeah, definitely. I have a lot of people do journaling. I have a lot of people do mirror work, standing in front of the mirror and sort of telling themselves their new story or looking themselves in the eyes and saying, like, you're okay, I'm okay, we're okay, this moment is okay. Even if you don't love yourself at first, like whatever, it's fine. Just the acceptance of you as you are right now. Looking in the mirror and being able to say that is really big.
Right.
And also, um, in order to accept the body, I feel like it's really, really important to actually be in the body. And embodiment is a big part of my work, not thinking so much about the body as much as experiencing life through the body. And that also goes into, how we listen and learn what works for us and all of that. But it's really hard to accept our body if we're not actually living in it.
Yeah, tell me more about that. That would have been my next question anyways.
Hmm.
How do you do embodiment and how do you listen to your body? Because I got this my interest in this field was it comes from my therapist and she said that she started paying attention to her body and all the intuitive eating came from that and it was really worked for her. But I said, okay, let's try it out, but I sat down with my food or whatever, and I couldn't do it. I didn't know what to do. So what? How does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of a giant experiment because you don't necessarily know at first. And we have such a habit of living in our heads and overanalyzing things. And I usually start with people just by doing a general body scan and having them sit and breathe and feel their breath and feel down through each part of their body. So I would do a sort of guided scan with them, scanning through their head and their shoulders and their torso. And we do this really slowly down into their legs and their feet and imagining themselves rooted into the earth and then just feeling their whole body for a bit without thinking about it, just feeling what it's like to be in a body. And that essentially is embodiment right there. But then to get up and take that out into the world is a whole nother process. And so I have people get into all sorts of things, whether it's yoga or dance or going for walks, whatever it is that sort of settles down the mind chatter a bit and gets you to a point where you can just ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? It's feeling more than it's thinking, and we use both, but we're kind of overdone in the thinking area in our culture. So I just get people to start feeling more. And as far as listening to what your body actually wants, this is maybe where I differ a little bit with the intuitive eating people too, is people tend to get a little caught up in like, what does my body want at this exact moment and how much does it exactly want? And I think it can be a lot more relaxed than that. And we can just sort of go for what we're craving and just pay attention. Like eat it, eat it slowly, enjoy it. Notice if anything comes up. Do you digest it well? Do you feel energized? Do you feel weighed down? If you eat it several days in a row, are you feeling still great? Are you feeling foggy headed? The body speaks in the language of pleasure and pain. So if there's pain, if there's symptoms, something's not working. And that's when you can sort of start paying closer attention. You can take notes if you want, but it can be a simpler process than that.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me. To me, that sounds like applying the scientific method to your own
Mm,
body in a way.
totally. Yeah, I always sort of like to think of my body as my own little like petri dish. It's my experiment, and I'm the scientist, and I get to see what works and what doesn't.
So, why do you think that people have trouble with this? Like we have all we have all the system in place. We have all the neurons. We have everything going, and I'm guessing that the moment you really focus on being mindful, you start seeing it. So, why isn't this just automatic? Where is the disconnect?
Well, we definitely generally live in our heads. We want to be in control. We are trained to, oh gosh, there are so many layers to this. Um, we're trained that eating certain things are bad and eating certain things are good, and we're not conditioned to listen to our bodies. We're conditioned for a sort of outside in result. We think about it, we write it down, there's this much, we do it, rather than an inside out, which is getting in and feeling and eating and experimenting and seeing how much you need. And it's kind of uncomfortable because we're not used to feeling. And not to mention, if a lot of your issue is emotional, if you're wanting to control because you feel so out of control in the rest of your life, or if you're terrified of gaining weight, or if you just can't accept yourself, then it's hard to let go and let the process happen. So I think there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of control, um, and when we're feeling that much, other things can come up. When we're not distracting ourselves with intense dieting or emotional eating, maybe some things come up that we don't want to look at. Maybe some things come up that we don't want to feel, and it's very uncomfortable. And if people don't know this and aren't uncovering it consciously, then it's just uncomfortable and they don't want to do it. They can't move forward. It can be quite paralyzing, actually.
So how do you deal with that?
It depends on the person. I would probably get them to maybe imagine the moment, like walk through it in their heads with me of maybe sitting still with a meal, and I would ask what's coming up for them. What's coming up for them? Where do you feel it in your body? Maybe I would have them journal, just stream of consciousness, everything that's in their head, every tedious thing, every scary thing. And after a while, stuff starts to come up, and it's like, oh, I'm worried about this. Oh, I don't want to feel this. Oh, I actually haven't really accepted my body yet. Oh, I am really afraid of gaining weight. Oh, if I do this, it means this. All manner of things can come up, but it's really about practice. It's about rewiring our brains to relate with life, relate with food, relate with our bodies in a new way.
Right. In my experience, usually a lot of like this eating disorders are fundamentally psychological. Am I
Hmm.
correct in saying that?
Yeah, generally.
Right. And most psychological issues are usually rooted in childhood. So I'd like to ask you, are children at some point connected to all this feedback and then they lose it? Or how does it work?
Yeah, if you think of a baby, like when a baby comes into the world, it doesn't have language and it doesn't have judgments. It just, if it's hungry, it cries. When it's done, it stops. It's pure sensation and reaction. And eventually, we gain language and we gain belief systems and we gain judgments and we pick up on shoulds and shouldn'ts and what's acceptable and what makes us accepted. And we do what it takes to be accepted within our family and within our culture. And that's a sort of very natural process. And when we're young, we don't really have the tools to undo all of that. If it's harmful, we don't necessarily see that it's harmful until we get older and, things get even more complex with body image and heavier expectations and the ability to control one's diet. So I think because of all of the common cultural beliefs, it's almost impossible to grow up having a healthy relationship with food in one's body.
So I know many of my listeners are either young parents or aim to have children soon.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
what advice would you give to them to help their child avoid these issues, to shelter them from this cultural norm that is destroying their eating habits?
I don't know that you can shelter them from the culture, but the best thing that you can do is love your own body, listen to your own body. Don't restrict foods. Some will say, some people will say, particularly in the intuitive eating world, you shouldn't restrict anything. Have Oreos in the house, have cereal in the house, have sugar in the house, whatever. Um, I tend to think that kids are better off with real whole foods and setting their palates that way. I wouldn't say that it's right or wrong. I would just say that it's easier. But in general, not to restrict them when they go out, and not to restrict yourself and to demonstrate what a healthy relationship with food and body is, because so many body image issues generally come from watching our parents and how our parents relate to our bodies. It's very rare that I meet a woman whose mother has a healthy relationship with her body, even, to this day, as they're grown women and their mothers are much older women.
Right. What do you think about the average Western approach in a family to meal timing?
I mean, I think that kids should be given as much freedom as possible. I don't think that it's a huge deal. I mean, sometimes structures are put in place just for ease, and we meals are a time for sitting down and maybe like relating with our family and enjoying our family, and meals are set and whatever. But I also think kids should have, a bit more free roam to snack and eat when they need to eat and be more intuitive rather than being rigid and not having to clean their plates or whatever. Like there can be structure and there can be flexibility.
Right, so should they have access to food at any time they please? Would you recommend that?
In my opinion, yes. I'm also not a parent and not particularly like that's definitely not my expertise. I'm more thinking back sort of on my own childhood, and I think that that would have been helpful because we were very like you can't snack between meals, and meal times are this time, this time, this time, and that was hard for me. So this is more less expertise and more just personal experience.
Right. Shifting to a different topic, something that I noticed. Well, I signed up on an intuitive eating group to find people to interview, and that's where I found you. And the very interesting thing was that I couldn't see a single man there. Like maybe I
Mm.
missed him, but definitely demographics were heavily shifted towards women.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, so far my audience is 80 to 85% men.
Mm, mhm.
I'm curious what your opinion is. Why hasn't this kind of approach caught up with men? Be- yeah, go.
I think that it definitely is a more feminine approach, and we all have, a masculine polarity and a feminine polarity in us, and the masculine polarity is its logic and planning and rationality and diets and a little more maybe rigidity, and the feminine polarity itself is the intuition, is sensuality, is living in the present moment. And there's a whole spectrum in between. So I don't know that it necessarily pulls most men in. I think there are some men who are a little more balanced in their masculine and feminine polarity, and it may just call to them more. And for others, it may just not serve them. And for that matter, actually, I do think that some men, a lot of men tend to be more intuitive and not have so many rules. Um, and I realize there are judgments against men and men's bodies, and it's not easy being a man in our culture either, but there isn't quite as much. And I feel like men don't have as much judgment on themselves, so it is easier for them to naturally eat intuitively without really thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think another side to that is that I'm in a way I'm certain that a lot of men have body image issues and
Hmm. Hmm.
eating disorders, but I don't think they feel as comfortable speaking about that as women
Right.
do in general. Because I kind of when I think of diet and men, I think of these what I saw is these bodybuilding forums,
Hmm.
and I didn't really see any kind of vulnerability there. Like something that I really appreciated on this group that I joined in, I kind of looked around, was there are a lot of people saying, hey, I'm having some trouble, I this is my experience, these are my emotions, and just opening up and being really honest and vulnerable there in the moment. And I think there's a safety in that group that you will not be judged. I never saw that in these men dominated
Mm.
forums. It's always, hey, I got this problem, give me a technique,
Right.
or look at my stats about whatever. How can I improve? But there's no, I think there's a fear of vulnerability in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what is your take on that? How do you feel like men can be more tapped into their vulnerability and feel like it's safe to be open? Because that definitely, obviously, this is not my area of expertise, and you certainly must know a thing about, like you probably spend a lot more time with men and see how unsafe it is for men to be vulnerable and expressed and to share their feelings.
Yes, I would say for a man looking to be vulnerable, he has to he has to split off from at this point he has to split off from like the mainstream
Mhm.
community, and simply he has to build a circle of friends where vulnerability is acceptable. I don't see any way around that at this point,
Yeah.
and that's what I have done, and that's I kind of hope to create a community here. It's pretty early phase, but I hope that we can achieve that in the future.
Yeah, I hope so too. And thank goodness for the internet. We can always find our tribe eventually.
Yes, but until then, there are great groups on Facebook that I personally saw, and uh, I think the men can join that and get a benefit from a more a place where they can be a little bit more vulnerable. I think they would be welcome.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
So tell me some stories of your coaching clients. Tell me a success story. Tell me a failure story. I'm curious how that goes.
Well, I mean, that really depends on how you define success and failure,
Of course.
because people will come to me, and almost always everybody tends to think that they are the worst. And I will have people say, if you can't fix me by the end, it's not your fault. Like I'm going to be a really hard case. I'm your toughest case. And I always tell them I'm not aiming to fix you. My goal at the end of our time together is not that you will have the perfect before and after story, or that you will be perfectly fixed, or that all of your issues will go away. My goal is that you are in a place where you can trust yourself and you can continue on this journey without needing me. So getting people to a place of self-trust and self-acceptance so that they can continue to grow from a place of like internal pull and inspiration rather than constantly like looking outside of themselves for answers. So I know that's not a specific story, um, but that would be generally what I want for people. So, some people, I have people who end their time with me simply feeling free with food. No rules about their body, loving their body, everything's good. I have people who've ended years of binge eating and emotional eating and abusive eating patterns. It's all across the board, really.
Right. Are there people who for whom it's too much, it's too challenging, and you have to slow down? Or
Oh, definitely. Yeah. If I'm getting the sense that it's a lot of information, it really depends. Some people will come in having done a lot of personal growth work and they just need this kind of, I don't know, final push, somebody to tell them, like, you have your own best answers. All of the wisdom is inside of you, and like giving that power to them. And that's a pretty easy, not easy, but it's a pretty smooth 3 months. And then there are people that haven't done a lot of personal growth work and everything is new and they haven't examined their beliefs. And there's a lot to work through. So we'll start working together maybe every other week rather than every week, and taking it really slow and taking our time and emailing in between and just being really easy with it. There's no rush. Like there's not a destination to get to. I just want you to be more sovereign at the end of our time together than you were at the beginning of our time together.
right. You're currently based in Washington State, am I correct?
Yes, I am.
And do you work only face to face, or do you do it online as well?
I don't have any face-to-face clients. Everybody is, I don't really look in town. I suppose I could, but I love my way of doing things from Skype. Obviously, like if somebody from where I live found my work and we were a good fit, we'd definitely go sit somewhere or they could come over or whatever. But yeah, everything is Skype, everything is online.
Yeah, it's an interesting century. Like all of I
It's,
have the same thing. All of my connections are almost exclusively online at this point, especially coaching type.
yeah, yeah, it's great.
So how can people find you?
Oh, you can go to my website. It's randemoss.com, RANDEMOSS.com. And I have the one-on-one coaching, I have free programs, I have group programs, and all of my social media stuff is linked there as well.
Great. Well, Randy, thank you for coming on Valiant Growth. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This was a really nice conversation.
Thank you for listening to Valiant Growth, and I dare you to flourish today. If you enjoyed this conversation or have feedback about it or any other episode, please feel free to join us at facebook.com/valiantgrowth, and you can actually leave public messages there. I would be delighted to hear your opinion and get a conversation started.